You want to introduce yourself?
Oh, hi, my name is Mike Royer. I'm a one-time cartoonist that was born and raised in Oregon, and now I'm back there after spending 26 years in the Southern California. I worked with Jack Kirby and was a product designer, character artist for 21 plus years for Disney. And while in Southern California, I worked with Russ Manning and indirectly at other functions met the man at the other end down here who, after I walked away from Russ, filled my shoes better than I ever filled them. For years, I would say to Russ, let's take Tarzan back to Pellucidar. And when did he decide to do it? When Bill was working. Anyway, that's me.
Cool. Arlen.
But wait, the whole point is your music connection.
Oh, my music connection.
Yeah, we forgot about that.
Oh, yeah, that's...
No way.
Well, I picked up some things from Russ when I first worked with him. And to this day, if I'm penciling something, it's to classical music. That's the umbrella title for everything from chamber music to post-romantic. And then ink to rock and roll. And I wound up doing about 24 record album covers for a series called Cruisin'. And if you ever find any of the books that are about album covers, you'll learn that they think my name is Mike Neuer.
Typo they didn't fix. You were misread.
But the Cruisin' record album covers that I did tell the story of Peg and Eddie. When they first meet, go through high school, Peg marries somebody else, he's killed in the service. They meet at a anti-war rally in front of a theater where 2001 was just opening, and they wind up getting married. And it was fun doing those because after the first 6 or so, I wrote them. Didn't have an art director who was giving me weird little thumbnails. And it was fun. And I look at them now, and there's some of them that I said, that's not bad, and there's others, oh, God, I'd like to do that again. Because at the other end of the table is a man who, some of his first work that I ever saw were those Rhino Records albums, and this man is so good that I revel in his line work, and at the same time go, how does he have the patience?
I think you speak for all of us that know that guy's work.
So Mike, what was the year range of the Cruisin' series?
What was that?
The year range of the
Oh,
Cruisin'
I think the first cover was 1954, and we went through, when was Kent State?
70.
Through 70, and then we did some cruising with special disc jockeys, none of which I've ever seen. And 2 of my favorite covers, I don't know if they were ever printed, was the Christmas cover. And I liked it because the interior of the house is my house. And a couple of others that were designed for the compilation things put together for big box stores. And I would do a new cover that went on the packaging that fit in the overall continuity of 1954 through 1970. And it was just fun. And in those years, I was learning how to draw, and at some point I realized I was never going to draw what I wanted to do, and discovered, lo and behold, I loved funny animals. And in a way, it's kind of nice for the Disney stores to refer to me as the Pooh Man.
Sort of not nice.
But I stupidly, years ago to my son-in-law, gave him all of the vinyl records and their jackets because I was getting the CDs and they were easier to store, not realizing that the playlists had been changed for the CDs.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there are some differences.
For those of you who don't know, the Cruisin' series were sort of the greatest hits of each particular year, and in between each song, it was hosted by an actual DJ from that era, with commercials from that time too. So it was like listening to an hour of a rock and roll radio station from the past.
Were they high-profile DJs like
Yes.
Jack? Yeah, I've got a set of those. Somebody gave them to me on my 50th birthday.
Yeah.
A set of all the Cruisin' with all
The vinyl?
these things.
Yeah, I bought them as they came out.
No, this.
Yeah.
Vinyl. This is 10 years ago. Vinyl was about 10 years old. In a sense.
Well, I don't know what kind of research that William, I still want to call you Bill, that Bill did, but the research I did was quite an adventure. Because I did a cover where I needed the interior of a '57 Chevy, and the only place I could find one was at a car lot on Washington Boulevard. And here's this punk little kid with a Polaroid camera that shows up, and the big salesman in the double-breasted suits, and what do you want, boy? He says, "Can I shoot a picture inside the car?" And I go, "Okay." And it was an adventure researching, because even if you couldn't see very much of the car, it had to be a car of that year. And the newspaper headlines. And when I've got Peg and Eddie on a honeymoon, the newspaper across the couch is saying, "Beatles to split." You know, and out the window you see the top of a big hot car of that year, and so on. And the last, I think the last one to be printed was probably, well, the year of Kent State. And there's this guy in the foreground in a Mustang, and Peg in her tennis outfit, and the wind blowing it above her underwear. And in the background, Eddie's with some guys that are going out on the golf course, and she says something like, "Eddie," and he says, "We got to go talk about that mess at Kent State." And she says, "Well, then Michael, give me some more tennis lessons." But they were fun to do, and to research the cars, and of course, that was easy. That the Mustang was mine, you know.
Okay, Arlen.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so the year is 1975. I turned 17. I just started to drive. I'm going down the highway, and a song comes over the radio, a little tinny. I was in an AM Plymouth Duster, and a little AM radio there, and the song comes over the radio that sounded like a little bit of every song I ever loved. It opened up with the drums of Locomotion, and it had a sax solo that reminded me of something from the 50s, and it had organs and piano in it, and like the Phil Spector wall of sound, and most importantly, it had a singer who was singing with such passion and emotion. I was the biggest Elton John fan at the time, and because the New York stations didn't play the first 2 albums of this guy, and I remember I had to pull over to the side of the road and collect my thoughts over what I just heard, and the song was the song Born to Run. So I became a Bruce fan. I went from loving Elton John, because I knew he didn't write the lyrics. I had never heard anybody sing with such commitment. And you know, I grew up with the Beatles and the Four Seasons and you know, AM radio in the late 60s in the New York area. Anyway, so flash forward 3 years, it's 1978, and we're all waiting for Darks on the Edge of Town to come out, because back then, 3 years between albums for a rock and roll star was like, you know, I remember reading articles, whatever happened to Bruce Springsteen. And I was going to the Corvette's record store in Paramus, New Jersey every day after I got out of Rhode Island School of Design in my sophomore year, bugging the record manager for when Darkness on the Edge of Town was coming out. You know, pre-computer young people. You know, we didn't get any news. We just knew the album was going to drop any day. Anyway, he was so tired of me bugging him every day, you know, when is Darkness on the Edge of Town coming out? Finally, he said, "You know, Arlen, you got to meet this guy, Ken Viola, who is editing this Bruce Springsteen fan magazine." Now, I was art director of Batmania magazine when I was in high school, and I'm a comic book guy growing up in the Silver Age, you know, with all superhero comics. So I knew about fanzines. Well, a thought balloon appeared over my head like in a comic book. The minute he said, "There's a magazine," I said, I've got to be the art director of that magazine. And I met the editor, you know, a guy older than me, you know, Bruce's age, you know, from New Jersey. We hit it off. And there I was, a junior at Rhode Island School of Design, and I was kind of art directing as best as I could with the skill level I had, the magazine Thunder Road, which, if you're a Bruce fan, was his first fan magazine before the current one, Backstreets, which has been running since 1980. But in the summer of '78, I'm about to go into my junior year, and Ken Viola, the editor, calls me up, because he was also a roadie. That's how he knew Bruce, and he worked for John Scher at the Capitol Theater in New Jersey, famous rock and roll thing, and John Scher managed the Grateful Dead, so Ken Viola also did security. So he calls me up, and the album came out, Darkness, summer of '78, blah, 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 brilliant. And Ken asked me, he goes, Arlen, John Scher, the promoter, wants to have a special marquee design for the Capitol Theater for Bruce's shows in September. It's like a homecoming after Darkest Age Town put Bruce back on the map from being just a large cult to, and even 1978 compared to The River and Born in the USA, he was a large cult. But the point is he said, do you want to illustrate the marquee? So yeah, I said, let me check my schedule and see if I could fit that job in. Well, in exchange for doing that, I got, I think $100, and I said, give me six row seats. I was born on June 6th. Well, that show, September 19th, 1978, which I ended up doing the marquee design and the program book, it ended up becoming one of Bruce's most legendary live shows, and I maintain, because I've heard every show on tape, I maintain it is his single greatest live performance. Am I biased that I was in the 6th row of Bruce Springsteen's greatest show? Maybe, but God bless John Scher. In 1978, he decided to videotape the show. This is pre-MTV. I remember walking to the Capitol Theater, is a small theater, and there were 2 white screens, and they weren't even rectangles; they were squares. And nobody knew about video. You went to concerts back then, there were no video screens, it was all just the show. And he videotaped the show in black and white. Now, when people talk about Bob Dylan and his most famous show at the Royal Albert Hall, there's no video of that. There's no footage. There's a very murky, I think, thing of Dylan. You can barely see him, But God bless John Scher, he preserved for posterity. It's grainy black and white, but if you've never seen Bruce Springsteen at the Capitol Theater, September 19, 1978, you will witness Bruce Springsteen. That's what I'm giving to the aliens when they come and say, we have room in our spaceship for, we've heard about this Bruce Springsteen guy. I'm giving them the desert island thing. So, and I'm fortunate that here we are 30 years later, 40 years later, almost, and these images have become part of his history. And I've always considered Bruce to be the superhero of rock and roll. And I actually illustrate.
It's black, right?
It's black.
The screen's black.
He meant Metallica.
Screensaver must.
It's
It's back in white.
Imagination.
Prince's Black Album.
There we go. Spinal Tap.
Okay. Well, anyway, so the point is, I know I'm running a little long, but to make a bit of a long story short, in Bruce, I did see a super heroic persona, and that's why I feel, I became such a fan, and to this day, and because kind of like Captain Marvel with Shazam, he's got the powers of each of these 7 gods. There are 4 pillars of rock and roll, in my opinion. There's Elvis Presley, the first white boy that rocked. There's Bob Dylan for the great lyrics. There's the Beatles for the great band, and there's Jimi Hendrix for the great guitar. Those are the 4 pillars of rock and roll. Bruce Springsteen is not one of those 4 pillars. What he is the roof that built over those pillars. There is something about those 4 pillars in Bruce Springsteen, and that is why he's super heroic. So after the show, September 19th, I had the original art to the marquee. Ken Viola said, Arlen, if you hang it after the show, Bruce and the band will come out. This was before, this is when he was still a large cult. And sure enough, he did. And I got everybody to sign the original art, and finally, I wanted to see Bruce, but he was surrounded by about a dozen fans. And I didn't want to interrupt him, but I see John Landau's manager, and I introduce myself, and I've got the original art, and I tell him I did the marquee, and I go, I just want to meet the man who changed my life. And John Landau said, he changed my life too. And if you know about John Landau, he was the head records review editor of Rolling Stone. He saw Bruce Springsteen in 1974 and basically quit his job and became his manager. And so John Landau interrupts Bruce. He's drenched in sweat, wearing a t-shirt, and he goes, Bruce, there's somebody special I want you to meet. So of course, I must have had a grin from ear to ear like the Joker. But I remember girding myself I'm going to meet Bruce and show him the original art, and So Bruce turns to me, and I'm about his height, and I showed him the art. He didn't say anything, and he signed it to Arlen. And then I looked in his eyes, and I can still remember this, of course, like yesterday, but I wanted to communicate to him what rock and roll did for him. If you know about his story, what Bruce did for me for a generation that knows Bruce Springsteen. And I said to him right in his eye, I looked him in the eye and I said, Bruce, your music means more to me than anything else in the world. And I've been telling the story for almost 40 years, and I asked people, how do you think he responded to that? He didn't say a word to me. Didn't shake my hand. Didn't thank me. Didn't say wow. Didn't say a word. Didn't shake my hand. There was a split second when I said what I said. I felt like he knew exactly what I was communicating, and he gave me a brotherly hug. You know those Brian De Palma films where the camera circles around? That's how I felt. And of course, you know, there was a group sound. It was either people clapped, there was some group sound, but because I was in my Brian De Palma reverie, and of course my friend, the great Rhode Island School Design photographer, was out of film. And then of course, like the Zapruder assassination, you know, everybody that witnessed it is now dead. I'm the only one telling the story. So all you can trust me is that the group sound I remember hearing was something along the lines of, the fan meets the idol, and gets to say to the idol what everybody wants to say to him. And I said it to him as plainly and clearly as I'm talking to you now. And Bruce gave me the Zen most perfect reaction to what I said to him. And that's why it's been unforgettable. So thank you.
Our panel is about us, and, you know, us in rock and roll. And although I forgot what our subject was because I was probably flirting with a gorgeous blonde, we all forgot.
Which one?
But I just want to add that my involvement with rock and roll goes back to my senior year in high school, and I'm the oldest guy on here. And in Portland, Oregon, there was an Imitation American Bandstand show, and I did line drawings of Fabian and Elvis Presley and Pat Boone and Bobby Darin, and took them up to Portland, and the guy put them on the wall behind his podium, and it was on the show for a couple of years. They even had me up on a Saturday to do caricatures of their top dancers. But this was a time in my life when, as a junior, senior in high school, and middle-class family, and I wanted extra money, so every time a rock group would come through the area, they played at a place called the Cottonwoods Ballroom between Albany and Lebanon, Oregon, and I would do a drawing of the star attraction, and then after the show, meet them and try to sell it to them. And I went to a Fats Domino concert, and somebody said that they're staying at the State Motel. So at 2:30 in the morning, I'm knocking on the door. One of the band members opens the door and says, "What do you want, kid?" And I says, "I want to show this to Fats." And I took in the drawing, and he looked at it, and he said, "Ah, this is great," grabbed it and signed it sincerely, Fats Domino. And he says, what were you hoping to do tonight? And I said, "Well, I was hoping to sell it to you." And he says, "Well, I don't want to sign. We're leaving at 8 in the morning. Can you do me another one?" So I went home, did another one, drove back to the motel, met him as they were leaving to get into their limousine to go to the airport, and he gave me the whopping $25 I wanted. And I still have that Fats Domino signed drawing that I did.
Now you're going to say you still have the $25.
Hey, to the 17-year-old kid, that was a fortune. I went on the stage of Kid Galahad and spent 2 hours with Elvis to give him a drawing, which that was a sweet 2 hours, but I'm hogging the mic. Go ahead.
I believe you're next, Mr.
Well, my name is Michael Oshenker. For me, the year was 1984, and I never caught the name of the singer, but he sang this anthem on the radio about being born in the USA. And no, actually, I like Darkness too, and I like. I grew up with Bruce, and but anyway, I'm here to talk about the comics that we're doing. It actually connects with his history, and he was on the original team with Revolutionary Comics with Todd Warren, and in the late 80s, early 90s, very controversial imprint. Yeah,
Great.
So you know, and he's like me. We are working for there's a Northern California publisher, a guy Mel Smith, who decided to revive the whole idea, and I'm kind of the lead writer on this line of comics that I brought here. starts with Slayer and Exodus, and we're moving through metal, hard metal, and then into punk, and then into hardcore rap. That's kind of the way he's going, and why don't you talk a little bit about, maybe a good starting point is to talk about the original revolutionary comics and that kind of stuff.
It's really cool being up here with all of you, because it's the love of music is what connects people. It really doesn't matter. Nothing matters but what band you like. You know, why you like them, and that's the connection. And I think it's more pronounced with like punk and metal because it's a whole outsider thing, you know. But there's just this cool connection here, right? And because I was very aware of your work because we've done with Springsteen. Wow. So you come up with Springsteen whenever there's a cartoonist, dude.
How come my phone isn't ringing?
Right, yeah, I know, right? And I've already shared this with Mr. Stout here, but when I was growing up, I would go through the older brothers' record collections, right? And in the 60s and 70s, bootlegs were very common, you know, and it was, so he warped me a little bit. and I'm going to ask the question, you know that, right?
No, go ahead.
Okay. What's up with the pigs?
Oh,
And then I'll tell my stuff.
Sure.
I have to.
yeah, back in the 70s, it was a lot looser. You could bring your Sony tape recorder to concerts and tape the whole show. You could bring your camera and get right up to the stage and take photographs of the acts while they were playing. Obviously, that's not the same today.
When did that change, Bill? When do you think that changed?
Oh,
in the 80s?
It was a pretty short period. I think it changed in the late 70s. Because I was doing the bootleg covers in the mid 70s.
What was
And
the
then
pig rumor?
Oh, the rumor, the company I was working for was called Trademark Equality, and their little insignia had a dictionary pig. So I thought it'd be fun, since at that time, in the mid 70s, rock and roll was starting to take itself really seriously with prog rock and stuff. It's like, oh, please, get over yourselves, guys. So I drew the rock stars as pigs. So Pete Townsend is a pig, Paul McCartney is a pig, Johnny Yogo is pigs.
This is what warped me. Okay.
And I used to go every Sunday. I'd go, or the first Sunday of every month, I'd go to the Capitol Records parking lot because they had a big record swap meet. And I found out there that there was this rumor going around that I was having sex with pigs.
That's what I was told by the older brothers. So, anyway, back to what I was saying. I had to do. So anyway, so it's warped, and I met a man, Todd Lauren, of Revolutionary Comics, and I originally did not start on the rock and roll line. When I got the rock books, the early ones especially, it was like, okay, I've learned nothing, you know, because I already knew all this stuff. I'd read about the bands, and in the back of my head, I'm like, if I wrote this, I would write the shit out of it, but I'm not a writer. So I picked up Tipper Gore's Comics and Stories. It was supposed to be a social, political, EC, but modern, and I had an issue with the PMRC and the censorship, and so I bought them, and I was pretty disappointed. It just didn't have that kick in the nuts, you know what I mean? Well, so you know what I mean, the other kick in the nuts.
The ovaries.
Yes. So I called him and I said, you know, I've doesn't really hit the mark, you know, whoever's doing it isn't, kind of sucks, you know, and I can do it better. And he said, okay. And I'm like, fuck, right? I swear. And I said, well, you know, the only problem is that I don't know how to write a comic script. And he said, oh, well, you put panel 1 and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I'll see if any of my work is suited to being a comic. And then I wrote my first story at Denny's. And so I did that, and then Tipper Gore folded, and I started doing the rock stuff. And Todd was very, very proud of being unauthorized. So the whole point was, we can do whatever we want as long as we're telling the truth. You know, we weren't out to make people look like assholes. But if you're an asshole and it gets in print, tough. And I quote his review of my Alice Cooper book was, "Nice fucking love letter. Why don't you try being a journalist?" And I'm like, why? Right? So then I did the Anthrax book and we got into an argument. And, somehow from that argument I ended up doing a 5-part Pink Floyd series, which was featured in their Shine On box set. And they were so cool about it. And they reprinted it and said, "Here's the unauthorized Pink Floyd book, which we're reprinting without permission." And I'm like,
How did you get over the hump of not thinking you were a writer to end up writing?
I just sat down to write a story and someone bought it. That's really
Take notes. When somebody buys your work, it gives you a lot of confidence.
Yeah, well, and I had gone, after that story was printed, I had gone to San Diego Comic-Con and Clive Barker was there. Clive was wonderful and it was very small then. And someone had asked him, how do you become a professional writer? And he said, write something, and then when someone buys it, the minute someone buys it, you're a professional. It doesn't matter who it is. You know, and so that was like, wow. I ended up writing Hard Rock Comics, and that led to us working with Kiss directly. So I worked on their history book, and my funny story, because they were like my Springsteen, right? They were my superheroes.
Beth.
Right up.
Beth.
But let's not do that, Arlen.
I'm just saying, wasn't that the early anthem if you really knew Kiss?
No.
I like Kiss. I'm giving you respect. I'm saying, it wasn't Beth one of their early songs?
I hate that song. So
Here we go. Here we go.
It's kind of
Alex,
like,
I'll take Kiss for 400.
it's kind of like saying Born in the USA.
I got
You
okay.
get-
See, but I didn't know that. I thought Beth was the deep album cut that you had to be a real serious Kiss fan to know.
No.
It's the opposite.
That was the flute. That was the flute.
Okay,
So-
I'm being
so anyway.
schooled on Kiss.
I've been schooled on Springsteen, so
Now I know this trip was worth it.
we got to meet Kiss. They were recording the Revenge album at the time, and my Springsteen type story, because Paul Stanley was always my favorite, because he was confident, and
King of the Nighttime World.
yes, and Paul wrote the songs. They all write, they all sing, but Paul wrote the most songs. He was always the most consistent. When his solo album came out, it sounded like a
But
Kiss
Gene
album.
Simmons was a comic book fan. He comes from the whole comic book background.
He published fanzines. Yeah.
Right, from Israel. He was
Yeah.
living in Israel.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt for just a minute because he brought it up?
Okay. We're gonna go with Beth, aren't we?
Gene Simmons' favorite film was Pinocchio.
That is true.
And he got permission from the studio to use Pinocchio artwork on some invitations to something or other. The publicist who was involved in that was one of these guys that, stay away, you starfuckers.
Right.
Well,
We're all swearing now.
I happened to walk across, I was walking across from one building to another at Disney, and right in front of me was the publicist and Gene Simmons. And since I knew that the publicist felt that way, I just went, hey! And he turned like, oh God, I gotta introduce you now. And he says, Gene Simmons, this is Mike Royer. And Gene says, I've been wanting to meet you for years. Now, my youngest daughter was a Kiss freak. That night, I had gone to bed early just to read, and so my wife and I are sitting in bed reading, and the phone rings, the kids are watching TV, she answers the phone, and he says, this is Gene Simmons, is Mike there? And she says, oh, he's in bed now.
Look at him out of bed.
And Gene says, in bed, what the hell? He says, well, tell him I called. She walks into the bedroom, and I'm awake reading, and she says, somebody named Gene Simmons called. And I said, the biggest Kiss fan in this neighborhood, and you just kissed off Gene Simmons. And then she realized, and she screamed, and... And of course he left for Europe the next day, and it was years later that I would run into conventions, and somebody put up a sign that said the legendary Mike Royer, and he'd stop by and he says, legendary?
Pinocchio is a good favorite film for Gene Simmons.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very fitting.
So, yeah, when I met Kiss,
He likes to embellish and
He likes to
aggrandize.
well, so when I met them, Gene was there and I met him first, and it's like, well, okay, it's still awesome, but that Paul Stanley walked in and I went fanboy like that, which I'm prone to do.
He does it with me all the
I
time.
do. So he came in, he said, "Hi, I'm Paul," and I'm like, "You were my sex education teacher." And he's like, "I hope I did a good job." And I'm like, when I understood what put your hands in my pocket, grab onto my rocket man, I knew. And he's like, I wouldn't let go of his hand. I'm like still shaking it, like freaking out. And they were so cool to work with. So yeah, that was my Springsteen moment. And from there, Revolutionary folded. I did some work with Kiss. My stuff ended up coming up in the Nirvana, Kurt Cobain's journals. He had actually had my Nirvana comic and cut it out, so I felt this connection, which was cool. And Queen, when they did their visual biography, they reprinted some of the original Revolutionary stuff in it, which that's what.
Wait, were you also an artist too?
No.
Just
Just a
writer?
writer, yeah. So.
Just a writer.
Yeah, just Denny's caffeine. So that was really, really cool. And
Everybody can be a Renaissance man like the rest of us.
that's right. So, and from there, it was quite a bit of time. There was some other stuff, and I met Mel Smith, who watched the documentary on Revolutionary Comics, and our meeting went something like, he called his book a rock and roll comic, and I said, "That's not a rock and roll comic," and he said, "Fuck you," and I said, "No, fuck you," and he's not even looking at me, and the escalation, because I mean, we're only...
That was at Comic-Con.
It was at Comic-Con, right? The escalation, because we're only using the F word and variations on it, so there's not a lot you can do with that except get louder and louder and louder, and that's exactly what we did. And then he turned around and said, "Oh my God, you're Spike," and I, "Who the fuck are you?" Right? "Well, I'm Mel Smith," and I'm like, "So?" And he told me what he was doing, and that he had watched the film, and that kind of inspired him to
The documentary.
on rock and roll comics, which was really cool and something I never expected, because we were always the outcasts and outlaws.
And my entryway into the whole thing was because of Gumby and Pokey, because
Right.
Mel had the Gumby and Pokey license for many years. He won Eisner's for the stuff that Bob Burden wrote, and Rick Geary and all that stuff. And I was doing some Gumby and Pokey comics for him, and he's very loyal to the people he works with, and he knew that I liked all genres of music, so when he decided to revive that. But what's funny is Mel, he has this, he's an instigator. He's definitely an outspoken
He's the
guy.
second coming of Todd Lauren.
Yeah, he is. And what's funny is he's cowed through his comics, he has every right to put out these comics that are unauthorized, but it's illegal. And he's cowed all these groups into putting out their own comics, like Slayer as a result. Because they were very aware of our first one, the Slayer, and
I was going to ask you about
Kerry
that.
King is inside here. There's a photo of Kerry King posing with Mel, and he was endorsing it, but the singer Tom Araya was not into it, and they got Dark Horse to do comics based on their new album, which came out last year. So he cowed Slayer into producing comics. They probably thought they were losing millions on this.
But
so
do you see that as like backstabbing?
and then he cowed Guar into doing more comics, because they sent the cease and desist to Mel over the upcoming Guar comic. So he's weirdly pushing all these major bands into who erroneously think there's like tons of money in this industry.
There is.
Creating their own comics. So it's
That guy right there has all the money.
yeah.
Yes, you, sir.
So anyway, it's had a weird kind of reverse effect, but it's good for the fans. Now they get all these Slayer
What?
players.
Tell your story.
Sure, every once in a while, a fan will come up to me and he'll be shaking and nervous, and "Gee, I've been waiting to meet you, and hey, calm down. Let me tell you, this happens to everybody. Let me tell you about my fanboy meltdown story."
This is mic on. Is your mic on?
Down, there we go.
Here it is.
So, I've been in bands, since I was 14 years old, and one of the bands I was in the longest, my lead guitar player was getting married. And he makes all the equipment for Sting and for Ry Cooder and for all these terrific players. And Ry Cooder ended up being one of his very best friends. And so Jimmy Demeter is the guy's name, and Jimmy invited me to his wedding reception. And I said, "Oh, that's great, who's going to be there?" And he said, "Well, Ry will be there." I said, "Ry Cooder's going to be there. Oh my God, Jimmy, please, would you please introduce me to Ry Cooder?" And he said, oh, sure, Ryan's a really super guy. So the big day comes, it's in the afternoon, and Jimmy comes over, he says, you know, I promised to introduce you to Ray Cooder, come on with me, sitting right over there, and he gives me this great, glowing introduction. It's just wonderful. And then he walks away, and I immediately become Elmer Fudd on speed. I'm like, oh, gee, Mr. Cooder, I'm your biggest fan. I've got all your records. I got the B-sides, I got the A-sides, I got the foreign editions too. I had to get that one because it had a different cover. And now I'm having an out-of-body experience where I'm above myself, watching myself blather like an idiot, and I'm going, shut up, stop, just shut. And I can't. And I keep going, and now rise back on a wave. Who is this insane guy? So that's what I tell my fans. It's like, nobody's had a meltdown like that. So bootleg record albums. I used to go to concerts and I'd see people taping them, and sometimes if it was a great show, they would press it up as vinyl LPs, use about 100 or 200 copies.
William, where is this, in Los Angeles?
Hollywood.
Hollywood.
Hollywood. Some of them were sold in the shops, like Record Paradise carried bootlegs, Peaches carried bootlegs. You could buy them in the bins. And so I was been at a Led Zeppelin concert. It was a great show. I saw at least 4 or 5 people taping it, so I knew there was going to be a bootleg, and I couldn't wait to get a copy of that show. About 2 weeks later,
Where was that show?
it was at the Forum.
When you say copy, like, was it cassette tapes?
No, vinyl LPs.
Oh, the bootlegs themselves, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so the bootleg arrived in the store, and I looked at the cover, and I went, oh, God, this cover sucks. You know, the band deserves better than this. God, I wish someone would get me to do bootleg record album covers. And a guy tapped me on the shoulder and said, you want to do bootleg record album covers? Yeah. I said, Friday, 6 p.m. Selma in Las Palmas. Be alone. Bring your record player. So Selma in Las Palmas is a really seedy area in Hollywood. So I'm standing there Friday night, 6 p.m. And this coupe with smoked windows pulls up. And the passenger window comes down a little crack, and a piece of paper comes out. And I take it, it says Rolling Stones Winter Tour, and there's a list of songs. And the voice inside says, see you in 2 weeks. Same time, same place. Be alone. So I brought my first bootleg record album cover, and in some ways it was an homage to, I love Robert Crumb's Cheap Thrills cover, because I wanted to have a picture for every song, and also include caricatures of the band in the cover too. So I did that, finished it, went back Friday night, coupe pulls up, 6 o'clock, window opens a crack, and I put the cover in like I'm mailing a letter. And then a $50 bill emerged. $50 whole dollars. And eventually the bootleggers got comfortable with me and realized I wasn't going to turn them into the FBI, and so we started working face to face. Because the name of the company was Trademark of Quality, I kept pushing them to do higher and higher quality product. Initially, I would do the covers, they'd print them on a sheet of paper that would be sandwiched in between the boards of the album cover and the shrink wrap. Eventually I got them to start printing it directly on the cover, and then I pushed them into doing color covers. Black and white backs.
The Who one.
And one of the ones we did was called Who's Zoo, and it was a double album.
What year is it? Give me a year. What year?
Like 74, 75.
And Bill was nice enough to send me the prints of all these covers. So I had a collection of his work, and I guess that's, other than meeting you in San Diego at 70, this was how I really got to know his talent, was from these covers he would send me. Bless his heart.
So the Who's Who cover I did, it was like an Animal Crackers box, but with characters. The Who, each one has an animal. Pete Townsend is a camel, Roger Daltrey is a lion, Keith Moon is a gorilla, and John Entwistle is an ox, because that was his nickname, the Ox. And it was a collection of rare B-sides, foreign cuts that never got onto albums. It was all stuff that had never been released on an album before. And John Entwistle saw a copy of it and realized, wow, I had no idea we had so much unreleased stuff. So he did a legitimate release called Odds and Sods. When they did the CD release, the Who contacted me and said, "Can we use one of your Who leg covers for the picture image on the CD?" I said, "Hell yeah!"
Really? Did that blow your mind when you were contacted by the Who?
Yeah, it totally blew my mind.
10 minutes?
Wow. Yeah.
We have 10 minutes. There was a question that you had asked Michael as far as when Slayer did what they did. Did you consider that a stab in the back?
In other words, the fact that he got other groups to do their own comics versus doing them with you so that you get the income, did that feel like backstabbing?
No, not at all, I don't think. I mean, first of all, they're taking a different tack. They're illustrating essentially their songs. You know, we're doing biographical comics, so it's more about adapting their, rise and fall and rise. That kind of, what were you gonna say?
Yeah. Oh no, we got a question. One of the things that, I think that we've all communicated is that authorized does not mean better. I mean, some of your work, and the bands even acknowledged that it was better than what they were putting out. The thing with comics on bands is that people see authorized and they somehow think better.
Usually that's sanitized. But.
Yeah, and it is.
Exactly.
It is. Illustrating song lyrics is an art in itself, and I certainly use that when I'm writing a book because I'm trying to communicate what the artist is doing, right? I think something like, honestly, Nebraska would be a fucking phenomenal illustration because it's so bleak, and I want to see State Trooper,
It's got a lot of narratives.
Yeah, exactly. But for the most part, a Slayer song is, I love Slayer, but what are you going to do with it? And why should I buy this book? Because if it doesn't go past what's in my head when I'm hearing it, I'm really not interested. I'm more interested in picking up a biography and learning something about the band, but I've always been like that.
But there should be room for everything because
There is.
the growth of music videos are just in a sense, just like comics and film are related.
Absolutely.
So, the whole growth of video, it's funny, as a Bruce fan the guy never really did a video when Sonic talked into it
Right.
by his manager, but in 81 when Nebraska came out, right when MTV came out, Bruce put out a video for the song Atlantic City that was just like a documentary. It wasn't even, a video, so.
Yeah, and there's room for everyone. If that's what you're into as far as me creatively, writing, well, first of all, my stick figures are fat, so I'm not about to illustrate any lyrics. Okay, let's just be clear. There is room for everyone. It's the fact that authorized, it's the attitude that, here's what happens with authorization with a comic, okay? I'm in a band, Michael does a book on me, maybe I don't make anything, but I could work with him. If another comic company comes along, it's not a cooperation with the artist necessarily, it's none of that that's implied by the authorization. It is a licensing fee up front for you to use their name in their lyrics. That's all it is. So let's just keep it real. We had a couple questions.
Let him go first.
Okay.
Yeah, are you guys going to be doing a story about Randy Rhoads? I hope so. I'm from San Bernardino, and he's one of our favorite hometown heroes.
Randy was covered a lot in the Aussie.
Yeah.
My personal thing on Randy Rhoads is that as far as a comic book, I don't know how compelling I could make that. His career was extremely brilliant and extremely short.
Also, Mel's mandate, by the way, is to pick up from where Lauren left off. So a lot of the stuff that was already covered in the late, for instance, with Metallica, this is a clear example. There were already comics in by the late 80s or 1990. He's not mining that material. He is doing a Metallica that's coming up from that point on, like Black Album on. So in other words, he doesn't want to repeat what was done, kind of thing.
And Randy Rhoads, I think that's one of those mythical characters almost. I don't think it's possible to give Randy Rhoads. Everyone knows who Randy Rhoads is, correct? Ozzy's, right? When Randy Rhoads came along after Ozzy was kicked out of Sabbath,
He saved his career.
well, yeah, and those first two albums are revolutionary. So I don't know how compelling it would be. I would do a graphic novel, but I would only do it in conjunction with his family. It's the only way I would do it.
Yeah.
It's-
His mom was a music teacher. in
Yeah,
China.
Dolores,
Yeah.
sweet lady.
Yeah.
Spike, your opinion on the two guys that are portraying Ace, Space Ace, and Peter Criss
Ah.
on the Catman on the new Kiss?
My opinion of them, or my opinion of the situation?
The situation.
The situation, okay, so Kiss had 4 original members. 2 of them came back to the band, Peter Criss and Ace Frehley, and I actually get asked this question a lot, it's kind of weird. They wouldn't be able to do that if they didn't make a deal with Kiss, if the band members weren't getting stuff, because a lot of people's misconception is that Gene Simmons is a marketing genius and he comes up with all this stuff. He's very smart. It's the same thing. People are coming to him, to the band as a corporation, and saying, you know what, we want to make a
Kiss Coffin.
Kiss Coffin, yeah. And they're like, they either sign off on it or not. And this ties in with the makeup. The individual members all own their own trademark. They always have, and that's what was very damaging to Kiss when members started leaving. That's why Ace Frehley didn't put an album out for several years, because they would get 75% of what he did, but he was still getting 25% of what Kiss was doing. So my point is that Peter Criss was in Kiss twice and is still fucking broke.
He mentioned that on That Metal Show where
Right.
he never joined another band. That was his band. You know, he was part of that band.
Well,
And it, you know,
well, here's the thing, like, and Kiss fans are like notorious for like just being crazy about him. And Peter's twisted it into this, it's so disrespectful to the fans. No, it's fucking disrespectful to the fans, Peter, is selling your fucking makeup.
oh, he knows.
No, he sold it.
Okay.
And I saw,
What do you mean he sold it?
he sold his trademark to the band.
Oh.
Didn't I know that? Okay.
So, yeah, but he's twisted that to, oh, Kiss is taking advantage. It's bullshit, man. If you listen to Peter Criss's last solo album when he was left to his own devices, it's a piece of shit. He never liked rock and roll. It wasn't his thing. He was doing this for the money, and that to me was very disillusioning. As far as Ace Frehley, he leased the makeup. He's done with Kiss. You know, he's done with touring and all that stuff, and so Ace leased the makeup. So every time Tommy Thayer puts on that makeup and they do a show, he gets paid. You know, as far as my personal opinion of it, I think that my belief is that Kiss has always been bigger than life, and the mystique around them is really around the characters that they've created. And I rock and roll over, okay? I know, I'm telling you what my life is. Okay, one sec. I saw them a couple years ago, and they looked like they were having fun. So, and it was worth the money.
You think Iron Maiden's ever gonna do something like this?
No, because Iron Maiden will just keep touring until they drop. I'm sorry, what did you want to say? And then we have one more question.
Yeah, I like to promote 2 projects that I have nothing to do with. One is The Fifth Beatle.
Oh my God!
Fantastic graphic novel
I cry every time I fucking read it,
They're making a
so.
live action movie.
Yeah.
about the life of Brian Epstein.
Yeah, that is the bar for all rock and roll comics.
And then also, the 4-volume set, The History of Hip Hop, is absolutely fantastic. I'm not a rap fan, but my God, the set that Ed Piskor wrote and illustrated is such great storytelling. And these characters are bigger than life. I really highly recommend getting that set.
We got one question, we got 1 minute. There was a question back there.
Will there be a Bad Brains comic?
I would love to do a Bad Brains comic, but here's the thing with Bad Brains, okay? Because punk rock is all about freedom, et cetera, et cetera. If I read a Bad Brains book, I'm gonna write it. And it's gonna be all the controversy and everything else. I'm not a huge fan. I got to see them a few years ago, and I get it.
Mel will do it though.
Mel will do it.
How about the mentors?
I would love to do a Mentors, but I would make them look like the misogynist assholes they are.
Yes.
So, do we have any more questions? Anyone want to promote? We're going to wrap it up. Oh, and I'm writing Opeth, so buy it next year.
And I'm in the Artist Alley if anyone wants to come down and take
I'll be in Artist Alley tomorrow too. Come buy my stuff and take selfies. That was so crass and commercial.